Hi guys! I know it's been a little bit since I posted, but I am still pregnant. I'm actually 36 weeks right now, so still in the third trimester, obviously. Just waiting for the baby to get here at this point. But I am going to be starting a new series for you guys, a micro-steading series, which is essentially just a homesteading series. The whole point of this series is to give you a bunch of recipes and tips and tricks in the kitchen to start homesteading, because homesteading starts in the kitchen. You don't have to have a big plot of land and animals and all that sort of stuff to start homesteading. And because we're just focusing on homesteading in the kitchen, that's why I'm going to be calling this series Micro-Steading, which homesteading really is just about being healthier and more self-sustainable, which, like I said, starts in your kitchen by preserving food items and learning how to make things from scratch. So today I have a very simple, basic recipe for you. We're going to be making a traditional sandwich bread. I also want to note that to homestead or micro-stead, starting in your kitchen, you don't need to have a bunch of fancy appliances and tools. That's why today I'm going to show you how to make this recipe by hand, but I'm also going to tell you how to make it with a stand mixer. And I know that most people probably have a stand mixer, but they are quite expensive. So if you don't have one, there's not necessarily a reason to invest in one. And like my other recipes, I'll have the ingredients and instructions listed below in the description. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to begin this recipe by just whisking together the flour and salt in a bowl. I also want to note that this recipe will make 1 loaf of bread. So if you want to make more than 1 loaf, just double it or triple it. And we're just going to set this aside. Now to a saucepan, we're going to go ahead and add our water and our milk, and we'll heat that until it's about 100 to 110 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 to 43 degrees Celsius. And to a bowl, we'll go ahead and add the water and milk mixture, whatever sweetener that you're choosing to use, and the yeast. When you're making this recipe, if you do not have bread flour, you can also use all-purpose flour and sub it out in a 1-to-1 ratio. So the 3 cups of bread flour would be equivalent to 3 cups of all-purpose flour. And if you didn't know, the difference between bread flour and all-purpose flour is that bread flour has a higher protein and gluten content than all-purpose flour, which is why the bread flour makes such good bread. And you really don't ever want to swap out all-purpose flour for bread flour, because since all-purpose flour has a lower protein content and lower gluten content, it makes it better for more tender baked goods such as cake or cookies. But like I said, you of course can use all-purpose flour in place of bread flour when making bread. We're just going to whisk this up and then set it aside for 10 minutes for the yeast to bloom. And this is what your yeast mixture should look like after the 10 minutes. You should have a layer of foam. A properly bloomed yeast will smell very yeasty, like bread, and have that foam layer. If it doesn't, that means the yeast is either expired or your milk mixture was too hot and it killed the yeast. So you'll just need to discard it and restart if it doesn't look like this. If your yeast mixture does look like this, we can go ahead and move on to the next step. For the next step, we're going to go ahead and bring back our flour mixture. And if you are using a stand mixer to make this recipe, you'll either want to add your flour mixture to the bowl of your stand mixer, or you could have just gone ahead and mixed this in the bowl of the stand mixer. Either way. And if you are using the stand mixer, you're going to use the dough hook attachment and go ahead and turn your stand mixer onto a low speed, so just the first or second setting. And you'll just want to slowly add your melted butter and the yeast mixture to the flour mixture very, very slowly until it's all incorporated. You'll then allow the dough to knead for about 7 minutes, but if around the 5-minute mark the dough still seems a bit sticky, you can add 1 tablespoon of flour at a time to the dough until it creates a smooth dough. And if you're making this recipe by hand, as our ancestors would, we're just gonna add our yeast mixture and the melted butter to the bowl of flour and salt, and we'll just use a wooden spoon to combine it until a dough starts to form. It'd probably be a really shaggy dough, and we'll turn it out onto our surface and knead for about 7 minutes. And just like with the stand mixer method, if it seems a bit sticky, we can add 1 tablespoon of flour at a time until it starts creating a smoother dough. If you are making this by hand and it seems to stick to your hands a little bit too much, feel free to dust the surface of the dough with just a bit of flour as needed. And the whole point of kneading dough is to allow the gluten to develop properly, so allowing it to strengthen, which will allow us to achieve the correct bread texture, so a soft, fluffy bread. And we're now going to place our smooth dough into a well-oiled or greased bowl. You can use any type of oil to oil your bowl, or you can grease it using butter, lard, or whatever you'd like. I'm using butter. And we're going to cover this with a damp kitchen towel and allow it to set and double in size, which will take about 45 minutes to an hour and a half. If you live in a pretty cold climate and your house is also pretty cool, you can turn your oven on to the lowest setting, so about 170 degrees Fahrenheit or 77 degrees Celsius. And once it reaches that temperature, you'll just turn the oven off and place your dough in the bowl into the oven and allow it to rise in there. And in that case, it'll take about 30 to 45 minutes for the dough to rise or double in size. It's now been about an hour and a half, and we're going to go ahead and punch down the dough. We're going to reflour our surface and transfer our dough onto our floured surface and knead it for about 1 to 2 minutes. We'll then cover it with our kitchen towel and allow it to rest for 5 minutes. We're now going to shape the dough into a rectangle and get it properly shaped to put into our greased loaf pan, which you can either grease your loaf pan with butter or an oil. I'm just kind of flattening it out, and then I'll roll it up into a cylinder. And then just tuck the sides. I've covered the dough again with our kitchen towel, and we're going to allow it to set for 30 minutes to an hour to allow it to double in size again. Once again, if you live in a cold climate, you can use the oven method to allow the bread to rise. So that would be turning it on to the lowest setting, like I mentioned earlier. And then once it reaches that lowest temperature, just turning it off and placing the dough in there to rise. And once your loaf has doubled in size again, you're going to go ahead and place it in the oven that's been preheated to 375 degrees Fahrenheit or 190 degrees Celsius. And you can score your bread if you want, but you of course don't have to. And here we have our pretty loaf. I left it in a few minutes too long, but that's okay, it's still perfectly fine. We're now just gonna remove it from the loaf pan immediately and allow it to cool completely before slicing. And here we have our loaf removed from the loaf pan. It's so pretty. And like I said, let your bread cool completely before slicing it. It's best to let it cool, but I don't always do that. Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I hope you love this recipe. Like I said, I'm going to be starting this new series of micro-steading, showing you how to start homesteading, which begins in your kitchen. And I'll make a playlist for all the videos that I make for this series. To that playlist, I'll also be adding some videos that I've posted in the past that could be helpful for the micro-steading. I'll see you next time. Bye guys.